National Park Horror, the terrifying truth about the metal-eating fog in Serenity Peaks. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. We're here for the stories that get lost between the cracks of the official narrative. The whispers you hear at a remote campsite. The tales told by a seasoned guide when the fire burns low. We believe that some things out there in the wild defy explanation, and that the people who encounter them deserve to be heard. Tonight's story comes from a man who spent 35 years of his life on the road. A long-haul trucker. For him, the wilderness wasn't a place he visited for recreation. It was a constant, looming presence just outside his window, mile after lonely mile. He learned its rhythms, its moods, and its secrets. And on one particular stretch of highway, bordering a vast and silent national park, he learned one of its rules. A rule that, once broken, has no appeal. He asked us to share his account as a warning. He says the maps will tell you one thing, but the road will tell you the truth. So, turn down the lights and settle in. You're about to take a ride down a stretch of asphalt where the greatest danger isn't a blown tire or a sharp curve. It's the weather. Only it isn't weather at all. My name is Jedediah, but everyone on the road just calls me Jed. For 35 years, my office was a Peterbilt 379. My home was the sleeper cab. My world was the view through a panoramic windshield, and my soundtrack was the steady thrum of a Caterpillar C15 engine. I've hauled everything from fresh produce to industrial machinery across every state in the lower 48. I've seen sunrises over the Rockies that would make a preacher weep and blizzards in the Dakotas that felt like the end of the world. I've seen things. You don't spend that much time on the lonely highways of America without collecting a few stories that sound like lies. But this isn't one of those stories. This is the one that put me in this armchair, retired 3 years before I planned to. This is the story of Highway 119 and the fog that lives there. The route was a cross-country run I did twice a month for nearly a decade. West-east, California to New York. The leg in question was a long, desolate stretch of two-lane blacktop that cut through the mountain states. Specifically, a 90-mile segment of Highway 119 that skirted the western edge of the Serenity Peaks National Park. The name is a cruel joke. There's nothing serene about that place. On a map, it looks like any other park. A massive green splotch of protected land. In person, it's different. The trees seem darker, the mountains sharper, more jagged. The silence that spills out from it is heavy, ancient. Most national parks, you see signs of life. RVs, trailheads, scenic overlooks. Not here. The park boundary along the 119 is marked by a simple, rust-streaked wire fence and weathered wooden signs that just say no trespassing. No grandstone entrance, no welcome center. It's as if the Park Service wasn't trying to invite people in, but to keep something from getting out. The old-timers on the CB, the ones who'd been driving the route since the 70s, they had a name for that stretch of road. They called it the Gray Mile, even though it was 90 miles long. The name wasn't about the asphalt. It was about the fog. It wasn't a constant thing, not at first. You'd get it maybe one trip out of 5. But it was unlike any fog I'd ever driven through. Normal fog is moisture. It billows, it moves with the wind, it has thinner patches and thicker patches. It feels natural. This stuff was different. It would appear suddenly. You could be driving under a perfectly clear, star-filled sky, and you'd round a bend, and there it would be. A solid, unmoving wall of pale gray, sitting right on the road. It rarely ever strayed more than a few hundred feet past the shoulder, almost like it was respecting the park's fence line. It never rose more than 20 or 30 feet off the ground, a perfect, flat-topped ceiling of gray. It was thick. So thick your high beams were useless, just a solid wall of white light reflecting back at you. And the strangest thing? It was silent. Driving into it was like driving into a vacuum. The howl of the wind, the rustle of trees, the chirps of insects all gone. The only sound left was the rumble of your own engine and the thump of your own heart. It was a dead, sterile silence. It didn't move. I've been on that road when a 40-mile, an hour crosswind was shaking my trailer like a dog with a rat. But the fog just sat there, placid and heavy, as if the laws of physics didn't apply to it. For the first few years, it was just a nuisance. A creepy, unnatural nuisance, but a nuisance nonetheless. You learned to deal with it. You'd slow down to a crawl, grip the wheel until your knuckles were white, keep your eyes glued to the white line on the shoulder, and you'd just push through. It felt wrong. Like you were trespassing through something that wasn't meant for you. The air in the cab would feel heavy, static. Sometimes the hair on your arms would stand up. The chatter on the CB always changed when you hit the fog. Guys would get quiet, or they'd just do simple radio checks. You still there westbound? See you on the other side. It was an unspoken acknowledgement. We all felt it. This place was off. My first inkling that it was more than just weird fog came on a cold October night. I was about halfway through the 90-mile stretch, deep in the thick of it. The gray was so dense it felt like I was driving through wet cement. I had my CB on, listening to the crackle and hiss for some sign of another human being. Mostly, it was just static. But then, for a split second, the static cleared. And through the speaker, I heard a voice. It wasn't a trucker. It was a whisper. A dry, rasping sound. It said one word. Hungry. It was so clear, so close, it sounded like it was in the cab with me. I slammed my hand on the radio, thinking it was some prankster with a powerful transmitter. I called out, "Who's on this channel?" "Real funny, jackass." Only static answered. I tried to rationalize it. A stray signal from somewhere. Auditory hallucination from road fatigue. But I wasn't tired. I was wired, tense from the drive. In the voice, it didn't sound human. It sounded ancient, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I pushed it down, ignored it. But after that, I started paying more attention. I noticed little things. Smears on the road, visible for a moment in my low beams, that looked dark and wet, but were gone on the return trip. The road signs, the metal ones that warned of rockfalls or sharp curves, were corroded and pitted along that stretch, like they'd been sandblasted, but only up to a certain height, the height of the fog. That's when I started developing the rules. Unspoken rules, just for me. A protocol for surviving the gray mile. Rule number 1, and the most important, you do not stop. Ever. For any reason. Flat tire? You ride the rim until you're clear. Engine trouble? You pray and coast. See something in the road? You swerve, or you hit it, but you do not stop. Stopping is death. I didn't know how I knew that. I just knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut. Stopping meant letting the silence, and whatever was in it, catch up. Rule number 2. Keep your windows rolled up tight, and the vents closed. Don't let the outside in. I'd seen what it did to the signs. I didn't want to know what it did to lungs. Rule number 3. Don't look too deep into the gray. Your eyes will play tricks on you. You'll see shapes in the swirling mist. Things that look almost familiar, a person, an animal, but the longer you look, the more you realize the shape is wrong. The proportions are twisted. It's better to just focus on the white line and the road immediately in front of you. For a few years, these rules served me well. The encounters were fleeting, manageable. A flicker of a wrong-shaped shadow at the edge of my headlights. A moment of distorted, garbled sound from the radio that sounded vaguely like screaming. A sudden, inexplicable cold spot in the cab that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was all unnerving, but I was a professional. I put my head down, held my breath for 90 miles, and did my job. I told myself it was just a place. A bad place, but just a place. I was wrong. It wasn't a place. It was a hunting ground. And the fog was the predator. The change was gradual. Over the course of about 2 years, the fog on Highway 119 started getting more frequent. It went from 1 trip in 5 to 1 trip in 3, then to almost every single time I drove that route at night. It also felt bolder, thicker. It lingered longer. Sometimes I'd hit the edge of it at dusk and not break free until the sun was starting to tint the eastern sky. The whispers from the radio became more common, too. Not just single words anymore. Fragments of sentences. So cold, help me, it's in my eyes. They were always faint, buried in the static, like signals from a world away. I learned to turn the CB off entirely before entering the gray mile. Rule number 4. The silence was better than that silence. It was during this period that I had my first truly undeniable encounter. The one that scraped away any lingering doubt and showed me I wasn't just dealing with a spooky road, but with something actively, malevolently hostile. It was a late spring night, the air holding a chill from the mountain snowmelt. The fog was there, as expected, a thick, pearly bank of it. I was about 20 minutes in, doing my usual crawl, my world reduced to the 10 feet of asphalt illuminated by my low beams. And then I saw it. Standing right on the center line was a deer. Now, seeing a deer on the road is an everyday occurrence for a trucker. But this wasn't a normal deer. My first thought was that it was injured. It was standing stock still, but its head was bent at an angle that was sickeningly wrong, tilted almost a full 180 degrees, its snout pointing straight up at the foggy sky. Its body was rigid, but it was trembling, a fine, high-frequency vibration you could almost feel through the chassis of the truck. I slowed down even more, my hand hovering over the air horn, ready to spook it off the road. But as I got closer, the full horror of it slammed into me. It wasn't just the head. One of its forelegs was bent backwards at the knee, the bone clearly shattered and jutting out. But it was standing on it, as if it felt no pain. And from its side, from its flank, another leg was growing. A fifth leg, thin and spindly and covered in patchy, discolored fur, twitching and kicking feebly at the air. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an injury. This was a violation of nature. I was only 50 feet away now, the image seared into my brain by my headlights. The deer's eyes were wide, black, and completely empty. There was no fear in them, no panic. Just a vacant, bottomless blackness. As I watched, paralyzed with a kind of horrified fascination, its jaw unhinged. It opened its mouth wider and wider still, far beyond what should be possible, and a sound came out. Not a bleat or a cry of pain. It was a low, wet, clicking noise, like 1,000 insects chattering at once. And then, its whole body convulsed. It collapsed onto the asphalt, its limbs twitching and folding in on themselves. The fifth leg spasmed wildly. The clicking sound grew louder, and I could see the fog around it swirling, thickening, drawn towards it like iron filings to a magnet. Rule number 1 screamed in my head. You do not stop. I yanked the wheel to the right, my tires screeching on the wet-looking pavement. I passed so close to the thing I could have reached out and touched it. For a split second, Its black, empty eyes were level with my window. There was no recognition in them. It was just a shell, a puppet whose strings had just been cut. I floored it. I didn't care about the risk of speeding blind. I just needed to get away. I drove with the memory of that thing burning behind my eyes. What had the fog done to it? Was it a poison? A radiation? Or was it something else? Something that rewrites living things from the inside out. That image haunted me, but it was what happened with Ricky that cemented the terror. Ricky was a new driver for our company. Young kid, maybe 23, 24. Full of piss and vinegar, thought he was the new king of the road because he could back a 53-footer into a tight spot. He was all chrome and polish, a loudmouth on the radio who loved to brag. We've all known guys like him. Most of them learn humility the hard way, or they wash out. He got assigned the same cross-country route as me, running a week behind my schedule. I ran into him at a truck stop in Wyoming, just before the 119. I was on my way back east. He was on his first run-through. I was filling up my thermos when he swaggered over. "Hey, Jed," he said, a cocky grin on his face. "Headed into the spooky woods, huh? Heard the old-timers get all weird about this next stretch." I just looked at him. "It's not a joke, kid. When you hit the fog, and you will hit the fog, just keep your speed down and don't stop for anything. You hear me? Anything." He laughed. A loud, dismissive bark. "Ah, come on, old man. It's just fog. What's it gonna do? Get my paint job wet? Maybe I'll stop and take a piss in it. Give the ghost something to really cry about." I grabbed his arm. Harder than I meant to. My voice came out low and flat. "Don't be a damn fool. I'm telling you, there's something wrong with that road. Turn your radio off, lock your doors, and drive straight through. Don't stop." He pulled his arm away, rubbing it and looking offended. All right, geez. I got it. Don't stop. Don't want to get spooked by some swamp gas." He walked off, shaking his head, and I knew he hadn't heard a word I said. He thought it was a joke, a hazing ritual for the new guy. I got back in my rig and headed out. I was a day ahead of him, so I wouldn't be anywhere near him. I cleared the 119 without incident, just the usual creepy, silent drive through the gray. I didn't think about Ricky again until the next night. I was well into Utah, barreling through the salt flats. It was about 2 a.m. My CB was on, scanning channels out of habit. Suddenly, a panicked voice cut through the static. It was Ricky. His voice was high-pitched, cracking with fear. "Yon read me? This is Sundowner 1 to 5. Come on, anyone on this channel? Oh God." His signal was weak, scratchy. He was a long way behind me, but the atmospheric conditions must have been just right for his signal to bounce all the way to me. Another, older-sounding voice crackled back, much closer to him. "You got Longhorn here, Sundowner. What's your 20? You sound spooked." Ricky's voice was a torrent of panic. "I'm on the 119. The damn fog. My engine had just died. It just cut out, man. I'm coasting, but I'm slowing down. I'm gonna have to stop." My blood went ice cold. I gripped my own wheel, my knuckles white. On the radio, Longhorn tried to calm him down. "Okay, kid, just stay in your rig. Don't get out. I'm about an hour behind you, eastbound. I'll be there. Just lock your doors and wait." "But the noises, man." Ricky half-sobbed. "The noises started as soon as the engine died. It's like tapping, all over the trailer. Soft, like rain. But it ain't raining." My heart hammered in my chest. "Don't get out, kid. Don't break the rules." There was a pause, just the hiss of the open channel. Then Ricky spoke again, his voice a hushed, terrified whisper. "There's something outside. I can see a shape. By the fence. It's tall. Real tall and thin. Oh, God, it's coming this way. Kid, don't look." Longhorn's voice was stern. "Don't look at it. Just look at your dash. Keep talking to me." "It's at the truck," Ricky whispered. The tapping sound was audible now, even through the weak signal. A light, rhythmic tick-tick-tick on metal. "It's touching the truck. It's cold. The window is frosting over where it's standing. Jesus, what is this?" I felt a phantom chill in my own cab. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Then, Ricky did the stupidest, most human thing he could have done. He got angry. His fear curdled into foolish bravado. "The hell with this," he shouted, his voice suddenly loud and defiant. "It's just some tweaker in a costume trying to scare me. I'm not going to sit in here and let some freak mess with my rig." "Kid, Longhorn yelled. "Stay in the truck." I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy cab door being unlatched. The pneumatic hiss echoed through the radio. Then, a click as the door opened. The first sound was Ricky yelling, "Hey, get the hell away from my truck, you freak." The second sound was the tapping stopping. The third sound was a wet, guttural shriek. It wasn't Ricky's voice. It was a high-pitched, clicking, tearing sound, like 1,000 cicadas screaming in unison. Then came Ricky's scream. It wasn't a yell of defiance. It was a raw, primal sound of agony and terror that I will never forget as long as I live. It was short. It was cut off by a sickening, wet, crunching noise. The sound of a watermelon being dropped from a great height. And then silence. Just the open, hissing channel. Longhorn's voice came over the radio, shaking. "Sundowner? Kid? Ricky? You there?" Oh, dear Lord. I sat in my cab, miles and miles away, my truck still hurtling through the night. But I was frozen. I couldn't breathe. I had just listened to a man die. A stupid, cocky kid who didn't listen. He broke the rules. He stopped. And then he got out. The official report, which I heard about weeks later, said Ricky's truck was found abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 119. The engine was stalled due to a mysterious and total electrical failure. The driver's side door was wide open. Ricky was gone. A search of the area found nothing. Not a footprint, not a drop of blood, not a scrap of clothing. He had simply vanished into the Serenity Peaks National Park. They called it a missing person case. Another person lost to the wilderness. But I knew better. He wasn't lost. He was taken. He was consumed. And I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that my luck on the Gray Mile was about to run out. After what happened to Ricky, something inside me broke. The fear was no longer a passenger I could manage. It was behind the wheel. Every time my dispatcher handed me the papers for the CA to New York run, a cold dread would seep into my bones. I thought about quitting. I thought about refusing the route. But I was 58 years old. This was the only thing I knew how to do. I had bills to pay, a mortgage. So, like a fool, I kept driving. I beefed up my protocol. I added a new rule, rule number 5. Get through it before midnight if you can. The fog seemed less active in the earlier hours of the evening, more passive. It was after midnight that it felt hungry. I also added a few items to my cab. A couple of high-intensity road flares, the kind that burn magnesium white and hot enough to melt asphalt. I didn't know why exactly. It was a primal urge. A caveman's instinct to carry fire into the dark. I also bought a new mag light, the big 4D cell one. The kind you can use as a club if you have to. They felt like flimsy talismans against a god, but they were better than nothing. For 6 months, I was lucky. I got through the 119 on cloudy nights with no fog, or I managed to hit it early in the evening. The dread was a constant knot in my stomach, but nothing happened. I started to hope, foolishly, that maybe Ricky's fate was a one-off, a freak occurrence. Then came the night in January. A blizzard had just swept through the region, dumping a foot of snow, but the main roads were plowed. The sky was crystal clear, the air so cold it felt like it could crack. It was beautiful and deadly. I was running late. A delay at the way station, a slowdown for an accident outside of Salt Lake. I didn't hit the start of the 119 until almost 1 a.m. The fog was waiting. It was the worst I had ever seen it. It was a solid thing, glowing faintly under a sliver of moon. It looked like a river of bone dust flowing between the dark, snow-covered pines. The temperature gauge in my truck dropped 10 degrees the second I plunged into it. The silence was absolute. The cold, the dark, the fog, it was a perfect storm of everything I had come to fear about this road. I had my rig, Big Marge, down to a 10-mile-an-hour crawl. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel despite the cold. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. The road was too narrow, flanked by snowbanks and the park fence. The only way out was through. I was about 40 miles in. The halfway point. The heart of the darkness. My engine was a low, steady rumble. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was a hypnotic drone. My eyes were burning from staring so intently at the white line. And then it happened. Bam! A jolt so violent it threw me against my seatbelt. A sound like a gunshot right under my feet. The truck lurched sickeningly to the left. The steering wheel was torn from my hands. Blown tire. Front left steer tire. The most dangerous one to lose. My training kicked in. I fought the wheel, wrestling the massive truck back into the lane, avoiding the ditch and the fence. I managed to get it straight, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The truck was slowing down, the shredded rubber of the tire flapping and thumping against the pavement. Thump, 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 thump. Slower, slower. And then, Marge coasted to a stop. The engine was still running. The lights were still on. But I was stationary. I had broken rule number 1. For a long moment, I just sat there, the cab of my truck suddenly feeling like the most fragile, vulnerable place in the universe. The only sound was the low idle of the engine and the frantic pounding in my ears. Outside, there was nothing. Just the silent, suffocating, endless gray. Okay, Jed, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. Okay, don't panic. You can't change it on your own, not in this. You just wait. Wait for the fog to lift, or for another truck to come. But I knew. It was 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in January. I was the only fool on this road, and the fog didn't lift on a schedule. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was a physical blow. It was so complete, so profound, that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Trapped in a tin can in the middle of a haunted wasteland. I sat for what felt like an eternity. Maybe it was only 10 minutes. I watched the clock on my dash. 1:41, 1:42. The cold in the cab was getting deeper, a penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. It felt purposeful. Then it started. A soft sound. From the back of the trailer. Tap. So quiet, I thought I'd imagined it. Tap. Tap. It was the sound I'd heard on the radio from Ricky's last transmission. But this wasn't a radio signal. This was real. It was happening to me. The tapping moved. It wasn't random, like rain. It was deliberate. It was moving along the side of the trailer, from back to front. Tap, 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 getting closer to the cab. It was the sound of a single fingernail or a sharp piece of bone being dragged lightly across the aluminum skin of my trailer. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't dare move. I just listened as the sound crept closer. It reached the front of the trailer, paused at the gap, and then started again on the side of my sleeper cab, right behind my head. Tap, tap, scratch. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look, I thought. Rule number 3. Don't look at the shadows. It's just a trick of the fog. But this wasn't a shadow. This was a sound. And it was followed by another sense. A smell. A faint, cloying odor seeping through the vents I had forgotten to close completely. It smelled like damp soil, rotting leaves, and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood. The tapping stopped at my driver's side door. I held my breath, listening. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that was worse than the noise. I slowly, carefully, turned my head to the right, looking at my passenger side window, away from the source of the sound. I didn't want to see what was there. Then, a new sound. The gentle, metallic jiggle of my driver's side door handle. Jiggle, jiggle, click. Jiggle, jiggle, click. Something was trying to open my door. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. This was it. This was what got Ricky. I fumbled for the lock, my fingers numb and clumsy, and pushed it down, even though I knew it was already locked. The handle jiggled more insistently now. Harder. Angrily. I couldn't help it. My eyes were drawn to the driver's side mirror. I knew I shouldn't look, but I had to. I had to see what was trying to get in. The mirror reflected only the swirling gray fog, but in the middle of it, there was a shape. A distortion. A tall, impossibly thin, dark figure. It was vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its joints bent at strange, unnatural angles. It moved with a jerky, twitching motion, like a marionette on tangled strings. I couldn't see a face, just a pale oval, a smooth, featureless blankness in the gloom. As I watched, a long, stick-like arm detached from the body and reached for the window. The hand, at the end of it, wasn't a hand. It was a cluster of long, thin, writhing tendrils, like pale, blind worms. One of the tendrils touched the glass. A spider web of ice instantly bloomed from the point of contact, spreading across the window with a faint cracking sound. The cold intensified, stealing the air from my lungs. The thing wasn't just in the cold, it was the cold. I scrambled away from the window, pressing myself against the passenger door, my mind a vortex of pure terror. I was trapped. It was outside, and it wanted in. The thing at the window seemed to sense my movement. The pale, blank oval of its face turned and pressed itself against the glass. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just a smooth, shimmering, opalescent surface like the inside of a seashell. But I felt it looking at me, scrutinizing me. And I felt a pressure in my mind, a psychic weight, a voice that wasn't a voice that whispered a single thought into the center of my brain. Let me in. It's so cold out here. The glass where its face was pressed began to groan and creak. The frost was thick now, obscuring the shape, but I could see the glass beginning to bow inward under the pressure. It was going to break the window. It was going to get in. In that moment of ultimate terror, a thought broke through the panic. A primal, desperate idea. Fire. The flares. They were in a map pocket on the passenger door, right beside me. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, I fumbled for the pocket, my hand closing around the familiar, rough cardboard tube of a road flare. I grabbed one, my fingers struggling with the cap. The groaning of the window grew louder. I could hear fine, cracking sounds. Any second now. I ripped the cap off the flare. I pulled the striker strip. I had one shot. I didn't know if it would work, but it was all I had. I took a deep breath, aimed for the small, crank-operated vent window, and with a scream of raw, animal fear, I cranked it open just an inch. Just enough. I struck the flare. It ignited with a blinding, furious hiss, flooding the cab with an intense, brilliant white light and a choking chemical smoke. The light was so bright it was painful. Through the windshield, the gray fog seemed to recoil, to thin, as if scorched by the purity of the light. And from the driver's side window came a sound I will never, ever forget. A shriek. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was a high-frequency, electronic, tearing sound, like metal screaming and reality ripping apart. It was a sound of pure agony. I jammed the sputtering, burning flare through the gap in the vent window. It fell onto the snow outside. The shriek intensified, then receded, moving away from the truck with that same jerky, unnatural speed. I watched in my mirror as the dark shape scrambled back, away from the incandescent glow of the flare, and vanished into the deeper gray towards the park fence. Silence returned. But this time, it was a welcome silence. The handle stopped jiggling. The pressure on the window was gone. I was alone again, but I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. The flare would only burn for a few minutes. I had to move. Now, the flare burned outside my window, a furious white star holding the darkness at bay. It was a temporary reprieve, a tiny island of safety in an ocean of hostile gray, and I knew it wouldn't last. The shriek had faded, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. The thing was still out there, just beyond the circle of light, waiting for the fire to die. My mind, still reeling from the terror, snapped into a strange, lucid clarity. It was the kind of focus that only comes when you are staring death in the face. I wasn't thinking, I was just doing. Survival instinct had taken over. Start the truck. Get out of here. Rule number 1. My hand, slick with sweat, turned the key in the ignition. The engine, bless her cold, mechanical heart, turned over and roared to life. The rumble of the big diesel engine was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of power, of life, of a chance to escape. The shredded front tire was a problem. Driving on it would be slow, dangerous, and would tear the hell out of my rim, but it was better than staying here. I put the truck in gear, the transmission groaning in the cold. I gave it gas. The truck moved, but it pulled hard to the left, fighting me. The flapping of the ruined tire was a frantic, desperate beat against the pavement. I had to wrestle with the wheel, my muscles screaming in protest, just to keep Big Marge on the asphalt. My headlights cut a weak path through the dense fog. The flare was behind me now, its comforting light shrinking in my rearview mirror. I was plunging back into the belly of the beast. I drove. 5 miles an hour. 7. The engine screamed in a low gear. Every bump and shudder of the ruined tire felt like a countdown to another failure. My eyes were glued to the road, scanning for any sign of movement. The cab was still filled with the acrid smoke from the flare and the smell of my own fear. Then I saw them. At the very edge of my low beams, maybe 30 feet ahead, there were shapes. Not one, this time. 3 of them. They were standing on the road, shoulder to shoulder, blocking my path. They were the same as the first one. Tall, emaciated, their limbs like twisted branches against the gray. They stood perfectly still, a silent, skeletal welcoming committee. Their pale, featureless faces were all turned towards me. There was no way around them. To the left was the snowbank and the fence. To the right, a steep drop-off into a ravine. The only way was through. I remembered the old trucker saying, when in doubt, throttle out. I wasn't hitting them at 7 miles an hour. That would be like trying to push through a wall. I needed momentum. I needed to hit them hard enough that they couldn't latch on. I took a deep breath, tasting the chemical tang of the flare smoke. I downshifted, the engine roaring in protest. I stomped my foot on the accelerator. Big Marge surged forward. 10 miles an hour. 15. 20. The truck was shaking violently because of the tire, the whole cab rattling and groaning. It felt like it was going to tear itself apart. But it was moving. The 3 figures didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. A picket line from hell. As I got closer, I saw details that made my stomach clench. One of them was wearing the tattered remains of a brightly colored hiking jacket. Another had long, matted hair that clung to its featureless face. They were victims. Lost hikers, maybe. People who had wandered off the path. Or maybe people who had stopped their cars on this very road. Was one of them Ricky? The thought was a spike of ice in my gut. I was 50 feet away. 30. 10. I closed my eyes for a split second before impact. The sound was not what I expected. There was no meaty crunch, no scream. It was a horrible, wet, tearing sound. Like hitting a scarecrow stuffed with rotten fruit and icicles. A thump-thump splat that shuddered through the entire frame of the truck. I felt them drag along the side of the cab. A high-pitched, scraping shriek of their strange bodies against the metal. A hand or what passed for a hand lapped against my window, leaving a greasy, frozen smear, before it was torn away by the truck's momentum. I was through them. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, my eyes fixed forward, my arms aching as I fought to keep the truck on the road. The next 40 miles were a blur of pure, animalistic flight. It was the longest 40 miles of my life. Every shadow seemed to leap out at me. Every flicker of fog seemed to take on a menacing shape. And then, I saw it. The fog ahead seemed to be thinning. I could see the faint silhouettes of trees that weren't shrouded in gray. I could see stars. A whole canopy of them, beautiful and clear and real. I burst out of the fog bank like a diver breaking the surface of the water, gasping for air he didn't realize he was missing. The sudden return of normal sight and sound was jarring. I could hear the wind again. I could see the moonlight on the snow. I drove for another 5 miles, my speed still reckless, before my adrenaline-soaked brain could process that I was safe. I finally slowed down, pulling the battered truck onto a wide, gravel shoulder. I killed the engine, and this time, the silence was blessed. I sat in the cab, shaking uncontrollably. My body was racked with shivers, a violent reaction to the terror I had just endured. I felt like I was going to be sick. After a few minutes, the shaking subsided into a low-level tremor. I knew I had to check the damage. I grabbed the Big Mag light, its solid weight a small comfort in my hand. With a deep, shuddering breath, I unlatched my door and stepped out into the frigid night air. The first thing I saw was the tire. It was completely destroyed, ribbons of steel and rubber barely clinging to the wheel hub. The rim itself was bent and gouged from the miles of abuse. Then I walked along the side of the truck. My blood ran cold all over again. Where the things had hit and dragged along the side, the paint was gone. Not just scraped off, but eaten away. The bare aluminum underneath was pitted and corroded, covered in a strange, greasy, blackish-gray residue that seemed to be actively fizzing, eating into the metal like a powerful acid. It smelled foul, like rot and ozone. I reached out with the end of my mag light and touched the residue. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, colder than the surrounding air. And where I touched it, the black grease seemed to swirl, to pull away from the metal of the flashlight as if it were alive. I backed away, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. This was physical proof. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't road fatigue. It was real. I had the scars on my truck to prove it. I looked at my driver's side window. The frost from the creature's touch was gone, melted away. But where its face had pressed against the glass, there was a faint, milky, opalescent stain. A permanent mark, like a cataract on the eye of my truck. No amount of cleaning would ever get it off. I know, because I tried. I got on my phone. My hands were still shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to dial the number for our company's roadside assistance. When the dispatcher answered, I told him I'd hit a patch of black ice and blown a tire. I told him I needed a tow. I didn't tell him about the things in the fog. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy or drunk. When the tow truck finally arrived hours later, as the sun was beginning to rise, the driver, a big man named Earl, just whistled when he saw the side of my rig. "Damn, Jed," he said, running a gloved hand near the corrosive marks. "What in God's name did you hit? Looks like you sideswiped a chemical tanker." I just shook my head. "Something on the road," I said, my voice hoarse. "Something that shouldn't have been there." He looked at me, then at the long, empty stretch of Highway 119 behind me, then at the imposing, silent wall of the Serenity Peaks Park. He didn't ask any more questions. Some things, people in our line of work know not to ask. As they towed Big Marge away, I took one last look at that road. I made a promise to myself, right then and there. I would never drive on it again. I didn't care what it cost me. My life was worth more than a paycheck. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had tried to climb into my truck. Getting the truck repaired was an ordeal. The mechanics at the company shop were baffled by the corrosion. They had to cut out the entire section of the trailer's side panel and replace it. They couldn't identify the substance that had caused it. They scraped a sample, but their tests came back inconclusive. They said it was some kind of complex organic compound, possibly fungal in origin. Fungal. That word stuck with me. When I got back to the home terminal, I walked into my boss's office, put my keys on his desk, and told him I was done with the cross-country route. He tried to argue, offered me a raise. I just shook my head. I told him to assign me anywhere else, where I was walking. I think he saw something in my eyes. The kind of dead serious exhaustion that can't be bought off. He gave me a regional route, running up and down the East Coast. I never went west of the Mississippi again. But it wasn't over. Not for me. I couldn't just walk away and forget. I had to know. What was in that fog? What was the fog? I became obsessed. I spent my downtime in cheap motel rooms, hunched over a laptop, diving into the dark corners of the internet. I searched for anything related to Highway 119, Serenity Peaks National Park, strange fogs, missing persons in that area. Most of it was nothing. Official reports, tourist information. But if you dug deep enough, you found the whispers, the stories. I found a forum for retired park rangers and forestry workers. I posted an anonymous, vague query about strange atmospheric phenomena in Serenity Peaks. A few days later, I got a private message from a man who claimed to have worked in the park back in the 80s. He told me the locals, the ones whose families had lived in the shadow of those mountains for generations, had legends. They never went into the deep woods. They talked about a part of the park they called the Breathing Valley, a place where the ground itself was said to inhale and exhale, releasing a sour mist that would steal the minds of men and animals, leaving them as wandering, empty husks. He said that during his time as a ranger, a team of geologists had gone into that specific area to conduct surveys. They were supposed to be gone for a week. They never came back. The official search found their campsite abandoned. Tents were up, food was out, but the people were gone. Vanished. The official explanation was a bear attack, despite the fact that none of the bodies were ever found. The old ranger told me, however, that the search party that found the camp reported a strange, thick fog had settled in the valley, a fog that made their compasses spin and their radios fail. Then I found the other stories. Missing persons reports going back decades. Hikers who stepped off the trail and were never seen again. Hunters who went in and never came out. A surprising number of single-vehicle accidents on Highway 119, always at night. Drivers found dead of exposure or simply vanished from the scene. The common thread was always there, buried in the witness statements or the footnotes of the police reports. Unusually dense fog. The pieces started to click together in my mind, forming a picture of terrifying scope. The fungal residue on my truck. The legends of the Breathing Valley. The way the fog seemed to draw towards the dying deer. My theory is this. The fog isn't a gas. It's alive. It's a cloud of microscopic spores released by a single, colossal organism deep within the park. A fungal entity. Something ancient, vast, and utterly alien. A mycelial network the size of a city, with the mountains themselves as its body, and the fog is its breath. Its method of hunting. When you breathe in the spores, they go to work. They don't kill you, not right away. They rewrite you. They break down your body and your mind and rebuild you into something else. Something that serves the central organism. The deer I saw wasn't just a sick animal. It was a failed experiment, its body being grotesquely reconfigured by an intelligence it couldn't comprehend. The things I saw on the road, they were the successful experiments. Former people, former animals. Their minds erased, their bodies twisted into new forms, animated by the will of the fog, sent out to hunt. Puppets made of meat and bone. They are drawn to life, to warmth, to the energy of a running engine or a living being. When Ricky stopped, his truck became a beacon. When he got out, he was a meal. They aren't ghosts. They're far, far worse. They are biological horrors, extensions of a single, hungry consciousness that has claimed that stretch of wilderness as its own. The government? The Park Service? I think they know. Or at least, they suspect. Why else is the park so aggressively sealed off? Why are the disappearances so quietly filed away? It's easier to put up no trespassing signs and let the fog claim a few unfortunate souls on the highway than to admit that there is a monster the size of a mountain range living in one of our national parks. You can't bomb a fog. You can't shoot a spore. So you just pretend it isn't there. I don't drive anymore. I sold my rig. Sometimes on cold, quiet nights, I can still smell that rotting earth and blood scent. I can still hear the sound of that shriek and the wet crunch of Ricky's last moments. I still check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. I know what's out there. And I'm telling you this story for a reason. If you're a traveler, a trucker, an adventurer, listen to me. Look at your maps. If your route takes you down a lonely road called Highway 119, bordering the Serenity Peaks National Park, change your route. Go the long way around. It doesn't matter how many hours it adds to your trip. Because if you see that wall of gray up ahead, if you see the road signs that say caution, dense fog, you need to understand that it is not a warning. It is a promise. And if you have to go through, you follow the rules. Don't slow down more than you have to. Don't look too close at the shadows. And for the love of God, whatever you hear, whatever you see, do not stop. You've been listening to the Wilderness Protocol. We want to thank Jed for sharing his harrowing account with us. It's a stark reminder that the maps don't always tell the whole story, and that some local legends are born from terrifying truths. What do you think is happening on Highway 119? Is it a biological entity, a supernatural phenomenon, or something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you've had an experience in the wild that defies explanation, if you've seen something in the deep woods or on a lonely road that has stayed with you, we want to hear from you. Our email is in the description. Thank you for listening. If you appreciate these stories and want to support the channel, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe for more protocols from the wilderness. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what roads you choose to travel after dark. Never read these books? The Lethal Secret of a Library's Forbidden Folklore. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. There are rules that govern the wild places of this world. Unspoken laws of nature, of survival. But sometimes, the most dangerous wilderness isn't found in the deep woods or on desolate mountains. Sometimes, it's bound in leather and ink, tucked away on a dusty shelf, waiting for someone to break the one protocol that keeps it contained. Tonight's story is about one such place. A town library, a forbidden section of books, and the terrible price of curiosity. This isn't just a tale of things that go bump in the night. It's a warning about stories that refuse to stay on the page. So, lower the lights and settle in. We're going to a small, forgotten town called Crestfall Hollow, where the local folklore is very much alive. And it is hungry. Every small town has its secrets. They're like roots beneath the pavement, invisible but holding everything together. Crestfall Hollow was no different. From the outside, it was idyllic, a postcard cliché nestled in a valley carved by the Stillwater River. Old Victorian houses with peeling paint stood beside sturdy brick storefronts. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the silence was only ever broken by the cawing of crows or the distant rumble of a logging truck. I spent most of my childhood summers there, at my grandparents' house. For a kid from the city, it was a world of endless adventure. The forests that surrounded the town were a massive, living labyrinth. But my favorite place, my sanctuary, was the Crestfall Hollow Public Library. It wasn't a modern library. It was a Carnegie, a grand old dame of a building made from heavy, soot-stained stone, with tall, arched windows that made you feel like you were entering a cathedral of knowledge. The air inside was thick with the holy sin of old paper, binding glue, and lemon-scented polish. The floors creaked with a comfortable familiarity, and dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom. The head librarian was a woman named Ms. Althea Blackwood. She seemed as old as the library itself, a tall, slender woman with hair the color of iron filings, always pulled into a severe bun. She wore cardigans even in the height of summer and peered at you over a pair of silver half-moon glasses. She wasn't unkind, but she had an aura of intense, unwavering authority. She ran her library with a quiet, rigid discipline. It was her domain. I devoured books that summer. Fantasy, adventure, mystery. But as I got older, my interests shifted. I became fascinated by the town itself. I'd hear snippets of strange stories from my grandfather, usually spoken in a low voice after a few beers. Tales of strange lights in the woods, Of a woman heard weeping by the creek where no one was ever found. Of old farms where people just vanished. Just old stories, kid, he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder. Every town's got him. But I wanted more. So, naturally, I went to the library. I was about 16 at the time, full of that teenage certainty that I could uncover any secret. I approached the main desk where Miss Blackwood was stamping books with the rhythmic, definitive thump-thump-thump that was the library's heartbeat. "Excuse me, Miss Blackwood?" I asked. She looked up, her gray eyes pinning me in place. "Yes, Michael. I was wondering, do you have any books on local history? Or, like, local legends? Folklore?" Her stamping stopped. The silence that fell in that single, missed beat was heavier than any sound. She set the stamper down with deliberate, measured care. Her gaze didn't waver. "We have a comprehensive section on the founding of Crestfall Hollow and the development of the logging industry. Section 977.4, she said, her voice flat. "No, I mean the other stuff," I pressed. "The stories. The spooky stuff." A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. It wasn't annoyance. It was something else. Colder, like a door being quietly shut and locked. "We do not carry books of that nature," she said. The finality in her tone was absolute. Such things are unsubstantiated gossip, not suitable for a place of learning. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, because I had seen them. A few weeks prior, I had been searching for an old book on local flora in the library's most remote, forgotten corner. It was a section of alcoves in the back, past the genealogy records and the microfiche readers that nobody had used in a decade. The air back there was stale and cold. One of the overhead lights was flickering, casting the narrow aisle in a strobe of light and shadow. And there it was. Tucked away at the very end of an aisle marked Regional Archives, Restricted, was a single, small bookcase. It was made of dark, almost blackwood, and it looked much older than the shelving around it. It held maybe 30 or 40 books. They didn't look like library books. There were no Dewey Decimal stickers on their spines, no plastic covers. They were handbound, most of them in plain, dark leather or rough canvas. Some had no titles at all, just strange, sigil-like symbols embossed on the cover. A few had titles written in faded, spidery ink. I could just make out a few words. Stillwater Sorrows. The Hunger Beneath. Songs for the Hollow Men. My heart had started to pound. This was it. This was the real history of the town. I reached for one, a slim volume bound in what looked like dark red leather. Before my fingers could even brush the spine, a voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold as ice. "That section is not for public access." I jumped, spinning around. Miss Blackwood was standing at the end of the aisle, materializing from the shadows as if she'd been there the whole time. She hadn't made a sound. Her face was a stony mask, but her eyes burned with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. "It's for archival preservation only," she continued, her voice low and steady. "The materials are too fragile for handling." "Oh, sorry, I was just..." "You were looking for botany," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She gestured with her head towards the main stacks. "Section 581. I suggest you return there." The dismissal was clear. I mumbled an apology and scurried away, but I could feel her eyes on my back the entire time. It felt like a physical weight. So when she stood there at the front desk and told me, to my face, that such books didn't exist, I knew there was a secret in that library far deeper than any ghost story. The librarians weren't just organizing books. They were guarding them. And the most important rule in the Crestfall Hollow Public Library wasn't be quiet. It was stay away from the folklore. That summer ended, and I went back to the city, but the image of that black bookcase never left me. It became an obsession. A locked door I had to open. I didn't know it then, but my hand was already on the knob. And on the other side of that door, something ancient was patiently waiting for me to turn it. 5 years passed. I went to college, studied journalism, and tried to file away Crestfall Hollow and its strange little library as a fond, quirky childhood memory. But it was a splinter in my mind, a persistent itch. My grandparents had since passed away, and their house was sold. My only tie to the town was a box of their old belongings, including my grandfather's journals. It was during a particularly aimless winter break in my junior year that I found it. Tucked into the back of a 1988 diary, mostly filled with notes about tractor repairs and fishing trips, was a single, strange entry. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. "Robert went into the woods again. Followed the creek. Said he heard the woman crying. I told him it's just the wind in the pines, but he won't listen. He's been reading those books from the library. The ones Althea keeps under lock and key. He says they're not stories, they're instructions. He says the town has a debt. God help him. God help us all." Robert. That was my great-uncle. My grandfather's younger brother. The family story was that he left town when he was young, moved out west to seek his fortune, and lost touch. No one ever talked about him. But this suggested something else entirely. It suggested he didn't just leave. He went into the woods. The obsession came roaring back, now with a purpose. This wasn't just about spooky stories anymore. It was about my family, about a secret that had been deliberately buried. I drove the 4 hours to Crestfall Hollow that weekend. The town was even quieter in the dead of winter, blanketed in a thick layer of snow that muffled all sound. It felt like a town holding its breath. The library stood exactly as I remembered it, a stone sentinel against a gray sky. Ms. Blackwood was still there. She looked utterly unchanged, as if time was a concept that simply didn't apply to her. She recognized me instantly. "Michael," she said, her voice the same dry rustle of turning pages. "It's been a long time." "It has," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just in town for a few days. Thought I'd do some reading." I spent 2 days pretending. I checked out books on history. I sat at a corral and scrolled through my phone. I watched. The library had 2 other staff members now, a young man named Ben and a middle-aged woman named Carol. They were pleasant enough, but I noticed they orbited Ms. Blackwood like nervous planets around a cold, distant star. They never, ever went to the back alcoves. That was Ms. Blackwood's territory. I knew asking again was pointless. I knew I'd never get access legally. So, I formed a plan. A stupid, reckless, teenage plan that a 21-year-old journalism student should have known better than to attempt. I was going to break in. I staked the place out. I learned the librarian's schedule. Ms. Blackwood was always the last to leave. She would walk the perimeter of the interior, a slow, deliberate patrol. Then she would lock the heavy oak doors, and the final, resounding clunk of the deadbolt would echo in the twilight. The building had an old, single-pane window in the back, in what used to be a staff washroom. It was high up, but a rusted drain pipe ran right beside it. I had my entry point. That night, the cold was a physical thing, a biting presence that seeped into my bones. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar from my car's toolkit, I slipped into the alley behind the library. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Every scrape of my shoes on the gravel sounded like a gunshot. The drain pipe was cold and slick with ice, but it held my weight. I shimmied up, my fingers numb, my breath pluming in the frigid air. The window latch was old and rusted. It took 10 agonizing minutes of prying with the crowbar, each creak and groan of the metal making me flinch, before it finally gave way with a sickening crack. I slid the window open and tumbled inside, landing awkwardly on the tiled floor. For a moment, I just lay there in the pitch black, listening. The silence in the library at night was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The air was heavy, stagnant, and impossibly cold. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting a nervous, trembling path through the darkness. I crept out of the washroom and into the main stacks. The towering shelves seemed to lean in, their rows of silent books like teeth in a vast, dark mouth. The familiar smell of paper was there, but it was tainted with something else. An undercurrent of decay, of damp, turned earth. I made my way to the back, to the restricted archives. My light found the black bookcase. It seemed to suck the light into it, though it's so dark it was almost a void. My hand was shaking as I reached out. This time, there was no Ms. Blackwood to stop me. The protocol was broken. I chose a book at random. It was thin, bound in rough, gray canvas. There was no title. I sat down on the floor, my back against the opposite shelf, my flashlight propped up to illuminate the page. I opened it. The paper was thick, handmade, and the ink was a faded brown, written in an elegant, looping script. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten. The first story was titled The Griever of Stillwater Creek. It told of a woman in the early 1800s whose child had drowned in the creek. Maddened by grief, she had thrown herself into the same churning water. But her sorrow was so profound, so all-consuming, that it anchored her spirit to the place. The story said she didn't haunt the creek as a vengeful ghost, but as a nexus of pure, undiluted grief. It said that if you walked by the creek at night and your heart was heavy with your own sadness, she would hear it. She would be drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. The book described how she would appear at the edge of your vision, a shimmering, waterlogged figure. She wouldn't attack you. She would simply share her sorrow. The account described a logger who encountered her. He was consumed by a wave of such crushing, hopeless despair that he simply sat down on the bank and wept until his heart gave out. The story ended with a chillingly simple sentence. Do not carry your sorrows to the water's edge. The griever has enough of her own, but she is always willing to take on more. I finished reading and sat there in the oppressive silence, a cold dread seeping into me that had nothing to do with the winter air. This wasn't like a story from a book. It felt real. It felt like a field report, a witness statement. Then I heard it. A faint sound, from far away, at the front of the library. Weeping. A soft, mournful, feminine sobbing. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My blood turned to ice. It was impossible. The library was empty. I was alone. The sound was so faint, I thought I might be imagining it. But it continued, a heartbreaking, rhythmic sound of utter despair. I scrambled to my feet, my logical mind screaming at me. It was the wind. It was the old building settling. It had to be. I jammed the book back onto the shelf, not caring if it was in the right place. I fled. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran through the dark stacks, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly off the shelves. The weeping seemed to follow me, a sorrowful echo in the vast, dark space. I scrambled out the window, cutting my hand on the broken latch, and half fell, half jumped the last 10 feet to the ground. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, fumbled with the keys, and peeled out of the alley, leaving the stone monolith of the library behind me in the darkness. As I drove, my heart hammering, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a single, terrifying second, I thought I saw a figure standing under a streetlight near the library entrance. A tall, slender woman with iron-gray hair, watching me go. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but I knew better. I had broken the protocol, and Ms. Blackwood knew it. But the most terrifying part was the weeping. It wasn't just in the library. As I drove away from Crestfall Hollow, with the heater blasting, I could still hear it, a faint, sorrowful whisper on the edge of my hearing. The griever was no longer just a story in a book. I had read her tale, and now she knew my name. A rational person would have taken that experience as a warning. They would have driven as far from Crestfall Hollow as possible and never looked back. They would have burned the memory from their mind and been grateful for their escape. I am not a rational person. The fear was real, a primal terror that kept me awake for 2 nights straight. The sound of weeping finally faded by the time I reached my apartment, but it was replaced by something worse, an insatiable, gnawing curiosity. I had touched the truth. The story was real. What about the others? What secrets did that black bookcase hold? What really happened to my great-uncle Robert? The questions were a fever in my blood. The fear didn't push me away. It pulled me in. It was a siren song, and I was steering my ship straight for the rocks. 2 weeks later, I was back in Crestfall Hollow. This time, I was more careful. I booked a room at the town's only motel, the Pineview Inn, under a false name. I spent the day acting like a tourist, taking photos of the old church, hiking a well-marked trail. But my mind was on the library, on the night to come. My second break-in was smoother, more practiced. I was a professional now, or so I told myself. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a grim determination. As I slipped through the now boarded-up window, I'd brought a pry bar this time. The silence that greeted me felt different. It was no longer just watchful. It felt expectant, as if the library itself was waiting for me. I made my way to the back, the beam of my flashlight steady. I went straight to the black bookcase. My eyes scanned the strange, ink-written titles. Stillwater Sorrows, Songs for the Hollow Men, and one that sent a particular chill down my spine, The Hungering Root. It was a thicker volume, bound in cracked brown leather that felt strangely supple, almost like skin. I pulled it from the shelf. It was heavy, dense. I settled into my familiar spot on the floor and opened it. The script was different, more aggressive, slanted, and sharp. The story it told was of one of the original settling families, the Ashworths. They were farmers, trying to carve a life out of the stubborn, rocky soil. But their land, the story said, was wrong. It described a type of root that grew in the woods bordering their farm. A parasitic, semi-sentient thing. It didn't just draw in nutrients from the soil. It drew them from life. It could mimic sounds to lure animals close. A bird's chirp. A rabbit's distress call. And when the prey was near, smaller, faster-growing roots would lash out, entangling it, pulling it down under the earth to be slowly dissolved. The true horror of the story, however, was how it adapted. The Ashworth family began to hear things at night. A baby crying when their only child was fast asleep. A woman humming a lullaby. A man calling for help. The sounds were always just at the edge of their property in the tree lane. The book detailed how young Thomas Ashworth, the father, went out one night, convinced he heard his wife calling his name from the woods. He was never seen again. A week later, his wife, Martha, heard what she swore was her husband's voice, whispering to her from the darkness just beyond the porch light, begging her to come and help him, telling her he was hurt. She ran out, lantern held high. She too vanished. The final entry was from a traveling preacher who had visited the now-abandoned farmstead. He wrote of a terrible stillness and unnatural quiet, and he wrote that as he was leaving, he heard a sound from the woods. It was a perfect mimicry of his own voice, preaching a sermon of fire and damnation. The last line of the entry read, "It learns what you love. It learns what you fear. It offers you one to steal the other. Do not listen to the voices from the soil, for the earth is patient, and its hunger is eternal." I closed the book, my mouth dry. I had a sudden, vivid image of my great-uncle Robert, walking towards Stillwater Creek, hearing the griever's call. He says they're not stories, they're instructions. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Were these books warnings? Or were they playbooks for the things that lived in the shadows of this town? I photocopied the entire story. My plan this time wasn't just to read, but to document. I had brought a small, battery-powered portable scanner. It was slow, noisy work. The whine of the machine and the bright flash of the scanner light felt like sacrilege in the dead quiet of the library. Each page I copied felt like a theft, like I was stealing a piece of something that should have remained locked away. As I finished the last page, I heard a new sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a dry, rasping sound, like fingernails on wood, or roots on floorboards. It was coming from the aisle next to me. I killed my flashlight. I held my breath, listening in the absolute, suffocating darkness. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was getting closer. A slow, dragging sound. I could hear it moving down the parallel aisle, heading for the main corridor that would intersect with mine. My mind was racing, trying to place the sound. It sounded like something dry and brittle being pulled along the ground. My journalism instincts warred with my survival instincts. I had to see. I had to know. I crawled on my belly to the end of my aisle, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The scraping was louder now, just around the corner. I peered around the edge of the bookshelf, my eyes straining against the blackness. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a patch of the darkness moved. It was a shape, a low, tangled mass, indistinguishable from the shadows. But as it dragged itself into a faint sliver of moonlight from a high window, I saw it. It was a dense clump of what looked like dark, gnarled roots, knotted together like a nest of snakes. They were moving, pulling themselves across the floor with a horrifying, unnatural locomotion. And trailing behind them, etched into the dusty floorboards, were deep, deliberate scratches. I think I stopped breathing. The thing, the hungering root, or a piece of it, was in the library. It wasn't just a story contained in a book. The book was a gateway, an anchor. The massive roots paused, as if sensing my presence. A low, whispery sound emanated from it. It was a jumble of noises. A bird's chirp, a faint, feminine hum. And then, a perfect imitation of my own voice, whispering a single word. Michael. Terror, absolute and pure, seized me. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a choked, silent gasp. I scrambled backwards, crab-walking away, my hands slipping on the polished floor. I didn't run. I fled. It was a blind, panicked flight through the darkness, bumping into shelves, books thudding to the floor around me. I didn't know if the thing was following me, I just knew I had to get out. I burst through the emergency exit at the back, the alarm blaring to life, a deafening shriek in the silent night. I didn't stop running until I was back at the Pineview Motel, the door locked, a chair wedged under the knob. I stood there, shaking, gasping for air, the sound of the library alarm a distant, piercing cry. The next morning, I checked out before sunrise. As I drove out of town, I passed the library. There was a police car parked outside. And standing on the steps, speaking with an officer, was Ms. Blackwood. She wasn't looking at the officer. She was looking straight down the road, directly at my car as I passed. Her expression was not one of anger or surprise. It was one of grim, weary resignation, as if she had seen this all before. Back in my apartment, I laid out the scanned pages of The Hungering Root. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a cold, terrifying understanding. These entities were tied to the books. The books were not just records of them, they were somehow part of them. And by reading them, by releasing them, even in my mind, I was strengthening their connection to the world. To me, the incident started small. I'd hear a faint scratching at my apartment door in the middle of the night, only to find nothing there. The houseplants on my windowsill began to wither and die, their roots turning black and brittle. One evening, I was walking home from class. As I passed a small park, I heard a voice whisper my name from a thicket of bushes. It sounded exactly like my mother. I knew it wasn't her. I broke into a cold sweat and ran the rest of the way home. The folklore was no longer contained to Crestfall Hollow. I had carried it home with me, and it was starting to put down roots. Paranoia becomes your shadow. It follows you, clings to you, whispers to you in moments of silence. I was living in a state of constant, low-grade terror. I jumped at every unexpected noise. I avoided walking near parks or any place with overgrown plants. I started to see things at the edge of my vision, a flicker of movement, a shape in the shadows that would vanish when I turned to look. The scanned pages of The Hungering Root sat on my desk, a malevolent presence in my small apartment. I should have destroyed them. I should have burned them and tried to forget. But I couldn't. They held a piece of the puzzle, and I was still missing the most important part, my great-uncle Robert. I knew I had to go back. It felt like a death sentence, but the alternative living with this creeping dread, this slow, inevitable encroachment of the folklore into my life seemed worse. I needed answers. I had to understand what these books truly were, and what had happened to him. This time, there was no pretense, no stealth. I drove to Crestfall Hollow in the middle of a weekday. I walked straight into the library. It was quiet, only a few patrons scattered among the tables. Ben was at the front desk. He looked up, and a flash of recognition, and something like fear, crossed his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice strained. "I need to speak with Miss Blackwood," I said. He swallowed hard. "She's busy." "I'll wait," I said, and took a seat where I had a clear view of her office. An hour passed. Finally, the door to her office opened, and she emerged. She saw me immediately. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired. Impossibly tired. She gestured for me to follow her. We didn't go to her office. We went to the back, to the restricted archives. She stopped in front of the black bookcase. She turned to face me, her gray eyes seeming to look right through me, assessing the fear and the foolish determination warring within me. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice soft, but heavy as a tombstone. "My great-uncle," I said, my own voice shaking slightly. "Robert Fraser. My grandfather wrote about him. He was reading these books. What happened to him?" Ms. Blackwood was silent for a long moment. She seemed to age before my eyes, the weight of decades, perhaps centuries, settling on her shoulders. Some stories are not meant to be read, she said, and some are not meant to be told. They are meant to be contained. That is the protocol here. It has been the protocol for generations. This library, this position, it is not a job. It is a duty. A quarantine. A quarantine for what? I asked. The stories, she said, gesturing to the bookcase. They are not just accounts, Michael. They are living things. Symbiotic entities that feed on belief, on fear, on remembrance. To read them is to feed them. To copy them, to spread them, is to give them a foothold in the world outside of this place. Her eyes flickered towards the bag at my side, and I knew she was talking about my scant pages. Crestfall Hollow is a unique place, she continued. The barrier between what is and what is written is thin here. These books are the town's memory, its trauma, made manifest. The griever, the hungering root. They are real, but they are bound by their narratives. They exist within their stories. As long as the stories are contained, so are they. But when you read them, you invite them in. You become part of their story. The blood drained from my face. What happened to Robert? I whispered. She sighed, a sound of profound sorrow. She reached out a slender, pale hand and pulled a book from the shelf. This one was different. It was bound in simple, unadorned black cloth. She handed it to me. My hands trembled as I took it. There was no title on the cover. I opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise, and chillingly familiar. It was the same script as The Griever of Stillwater Creek. But the title of the first entry made my heart stop. It read, The Boy Who Followed the Crying. It was the story of a young man, curious and reckless, who became obsessed with the local legends. A young man who heard stories of the weeping woman by the creek. A young man who read the forbidden books and, instead of heeding the warning, saw it as a challenge. It described how he went to the creek, his heart full not of sorrow, but of arrogant curiosity. It described how the griever appeared to him, and how, because he had no great sorrow for her to take, she gave him all of hers instead. His mind shattered. He simply wandered into the woods, a hollowed-out vessel of grief, and was never seen again. The name of the young man in the story was Robert Fraser, my great-uncle. I looked up at Miss Blackwood, my eyes wide with horror and disbelief. But who wrote this? I stammered. There is always a scribe, she said softly. That is the final piece of the protocol. When a story is concluded, it must be recorded. To complete the narrative. To bind it. She took another book from the shelf. This one was unfinished. The last few pages were blank. The title on the first page read, The Archivist of Forgotten Things. It was the story of a nosy journalism student who broke into a library, a young man who became obsessed with a family secret, a young man who copied a forbidden text and took it away, allowing the entity within to put down roots in a new place. My story. The books don't just record the folklore, I said, the terrible understanding dawning on me. They consume people. They turn them into folklore. Not consume, Miss Blackwood corrected, a flicker of pained precision in her voice. Incorporate. The narrative demands it. When you interact with them, you step into the story. If you are not strong enough to step out, the story finishes itself, with you in it. Robert, he became a cautionary tale. A new entry in the collection. She looked at the unfinished book in her hands. My book. The hungering root has a taste of you now, she said, her voice grim. It is no longer bound to the soil of Crestfall Hollow. Your copies, they are a beacon. A piece of its narrative now exists outside of this library. It will continue to grow towards you. It will learn the voices of everyone you love. It will whisper to you from every shadow until it finally convinces you to step into the dark. And when you are gone, your story will be completed. And a new book will be added to this shelf. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I wasn't a researcher. I was a character in the final act of a horror story. And the ending had already been written. How do I stop it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How do I get out of the story? No one has ever succeeded, she said, her voice devoid of hope. The narrative is a powerful thing. It has its own gravity. Robert tried to fight it. It only made his story more tragic. She paused, her gaze locking with mine. For the first time, I saw something beyond her duty, beyond her weariness. I saw a flicker of something. A hint. But, she said, her voice dropping even lower. A story is only powerful if it is believed. If it is read. If it is whole. She looked pointedly at my back. At the scanned pages within. The copies. The beacon. The unfinished story in her hands. The unspoken message hung in the air between us, heavy and terrifying. The story she held was not yet complete. The ending wasn't written. I wasn't a part of the folklore yet. I was on the precipice. I had a choice. I could accept my fate, be consumed, and become a cautionary tale for the next foolish person to stumble upon the black bookcase. Or I could try to unwrite myself from the narrative. The copies, I said, understanding. They are an untethered part of the story, she confirmed. A wound that allows the infection to spread. A story cannot be in two places at once. It creates a paradox. A weakness. I finally understood. Ms. Blackwood wasn't my enemy. She wasn't a monster. She was the guardian of a terrible, living archive. She upheld the protocol. But she had just shown me a loophole. A desperate, slim chance. I had to destroy the copies. Not just delete the files. I had to destroy the physical pages I had printed out, the ones I had pored over, the ones that had become my obsession. I had to sever the connection. I had to starve the story. I turned and left without another word. As I walked through the main library, I felt the oppressive weight of the stories behind me, a physical pressure on my back. I felt the gaze of the griever, the hunger of the root, the silent anticipation of the scribe. They were waiting for my story to end. I was determined to give them a bad ending, one where the main character simply walks off the page. The drive back to my apartment was a fugue state. The world outside my car window seemed thin, unreal, like a backdrop. The only real things were me, the oppressive weight of the knowledge I now carried, and the stack of papers in the bag on my passenger seat. They felt radioactive. When I got back to my apartment, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The air was thick, heavy. I could almost smell a scent of damp earth and decay, the signature of the hungering root. It was close. I had brought the story here, and the thing the story described was coming to claim its new territory. I knew I didn't have much time. I spread the photocopied pages of The Hungering Root on my living room floor. Staring at the sharp, aggressive script, I felt a hypnotic pull. A part of me, the journalist, the storyteller, wanted to preserve them, to study them. This was proof. Proof of a world beyond our own. Then I heard it. A soft, scratching sound at the window. Scrape, scrape. I looked over. On the other side of the glass, clinging to the brickwork of my third-story apartment building, was a single, dark, thorny vine. It hadn't been there that morning. It was slowly, deliberately growing upwards, its tip twisting as if searching for a way in. The whispers started then, not from one place, but from all around me. From the dark corners of the room, from the hallway outside my door, from the vents in the ceiling. Michael let us in. It was my father's voice. Honey, are you all right? It's so dark in there. My mother's voice, full of concern. Just open the door, man. It's me. The voice of my best friend from college. They were lures. The voices of those I loved, those I would trust. The story was playing itself out, just as the book described. It was offering me what I loved to steal what I feared losing most, myself. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the papers. I had to destroy them. Fire. That was the only way. I ran to the kitchen, stuffing the pages into the small metal sink. I fumbled for my lighter. My hands were slick with sweat. The whispers grew more insistent, more desperate. Michael, please. I'm scared. My younger sister's voice, crying. My heart clenched. It sounded so real. For a split second, I hesitated. My eyes darted to the door. Don't listen to the voices from the soil. The book's warning screamed in my mind. With a cry that was half rage, half terror, I flicked the lighter and touched the flame to the corner of the pages. They caught instantly, the black ink seeming to bubble and writhe as the flames consumed it. A sound filled the room, a high-pitched, multi-toned shriek that was part human, part animal, part grinding stone. It was a sound of pure agony, and it came not from the fire, but from the walls around me. The lights in my apartment flickered wildly and then went out, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the frantic, hungry orange glow from the sink. The scratching at the window intensified, becoming a frantic scrabbling. The whispers turned to enraged hisses and snarls. I stood there, transfixed, as the last page curled into black ash. As the final word of the story turned to smoke, the shrieking sound cut off abruptly. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was more terrifying than the noise had been. The scratching stopped. The whispers were gone. The air in the room, which had been thick and suffocating, suddenly felt thin. Normal. The oppressive presence was gone. I stood there in the dark, shaking, smelling nothing but smoke and burnt paper. I stumbled to the window and peered out. The vine was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. I had done it. I had broken the narrative. I had torn out the page that connected the story to me. I never went back to Crestfall Hollow. I couldn't. I packed up my apartment the next day and moved across the country. I changed my major from journalism to library sciences, a choice that still feels deeply ironic. Perhaps I thought I could understand the enemy better. Or perhaps, in some way, I felt I needed to take up a new kind of watch. I don't know what happened to the unfinished book with my name in it. I like to think that Ms. Blackwood, seeing the narrative fail, simply removed it from the shelf, leaving it blank. A story that went nowhere. Or maybe she's still there, the weary guardian, waiting for the next person to break the protocol. I am free of the hungering root, I think. But I am not unscathed. I carry the silence it left behind. I don't listen to old stories anymore. I don't go to small, forgotten towns. And I never, ever, walk near the edge of the woods at night. Because I know what lives there. I know that the world is full of stories, and some of them are traps. They wait patiently in the wild, in the dark, and in the quietest corners of old libraries for someone to come along and read them aloud, to give them voice, to give them life. The Wilderness Protocol is not just about respecting nature. It's about respecting the boundaries between our world and the worlds we write about. Because sometimes, those boundaries are as fragile as a single, yellowed page. And once they are torn, You can't always write yourself a happy ending. Thank you for joining us for this entry in the Wilderness Protocol. The stories we tell have power. They shape our understanding of the world, and sometimes, the world itself. Be careful which stories you seek out, and which ones you choose to believe. If you made it this far through the silence of Crestfall Hollow, please consider supporting the channel by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. It lets the algorithm know that you appreciate these longer, more immersive tales from the wilder edges of our map. Leave a comment below and let me know if your town has a place like the Crestfall Hollow Library, a place with secrets that are best left on the shelf. Until next time, stay vigilant. Stay curious, but stay cautious. And whatever you do, remember the protocol. We bought our dream house. The note inside said, "Don't listen to the wind." There are rules for survival. Protocols. They aren't always written down in guidebooks or taught in classrooms. Sometimes, they're scribbled on a forgotten piece of paper. A warning passed from one soul to the next. A single sentence that stands between you and something else. My protocol is simple. It was given to me, and now I'm giving it to you. If you ever find yourself in a place where the air itself feels ancient and watchful, if you ever feel a loneliness so profound it seems to have a life of its own, don't listen to the wind. My wife, Sarah, and I have been dreaming of this for years. Escaping the city, the noise, the concrete, the relentless pace of it all. We wanted green. We wanted quiet. We wanted a place where we could hear ourselves think, a place to build a future, maybe start a family. We wanted a home. After months of searching, we found it. A two-story Victorian house, a bit neglected but with what the real estate agents call good bones. It was painted a faded robin's egg blue, with white trim that was peeling like sunburnt skin. It had a wraparound porch with a swing, a big backyard that bled into the edge of a sprawling public park, and windows that seemed to drink in the afternoon light. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, or at least they will soon enough. And the park was the crown jewel. Old oak and maple trees, a small lake, walking trails that disappeared into the woods. Our house was one of a handful that bordered it directly. We could already imagine morning coffees on the porch, watching dog walkers and joggers meander by. The previous owners were an older couple, the Hendersons. We only met them once, during the final walkthrough. They seemed rushed, eager. Their eyes darted around the empty rooms as if they expected to see something, or perhaps, as if they were afraid of being seen. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. I chalked it up to the emotion of leaving a home they've lived in for decades. Selling a house is a stressful process. I told myself that. "You'll love the peace and quiet," Mr. Henderson said, his voice a little too loud in the echoing space of the living room. His wife just nodded, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. They practically sprinted through the signing of the final papers. Looking back, their haste was the first red flag, a tiny crack in the perfect facade of our new life. We moved in on a bright, cloudless day in early October. The air was crisp, and the leaves in the park were just beginning to turn, painting the horizon in strokes of gold and crimson. The first few days were a blissful chaos of unpacking boxes, painting walls, and making the house our own. We were exhausted but happy, truly happy. It was on the third night that I found it. I was in the kitchen, wrestling with a stubborn box of old silverware we'd inherited from my grandmother. Tucked away at the very bottom, beneath tarnished spoons and forks, was a small, folded piece of yellowed paper. It was thick, almost like cardstock, and the edges were soft with age. I unfolded it. On it, in a shaky, spidery cursive, were 5 simple words. "Don't listen to the wind." I chuckled. It felt like something out of a children's ghost story. A quirky little remnant from the Hendersons, maybe an inside joke. I showed it to Sarah. She smiled, her eyes crinkling. "How charmingly spooky," she said, before tucking it into the junk drawer with the spare batteries and takeout menus. A curio. A piece of the house's history. We didn't think about it again. Not for a while, anyway. We were too busy living our dream. We fixed the porch swing. We planted a small garden. We spent our evenings walking the trails in the park as the sun set. The house felt warm, welcoming. It felt like home. But a house, like a person, has its own sounds. The groan of settling foundations, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of pipes. You get used to them. They become the house's unique heartbeat. But then, a new sound began to weave its way into the familiar symphony. It started subtly. A low, mournful hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I'd be reading in the living room, and I'd pause, looking up, thinking it was a distant airplane or a truck on the main road. But the sound wasn't external. It felt internal, as if the house itself was humming a long, sad song. Then came the whistle, a high, thin note that would slice through the quiet of the night. It sounded like someone pursing their lips and blowing, a sharp, piercing tune that would drift down the upstairs hallway. The first time I heard it, I got up and checked the whole house. Windows were shut tight. No drafts. Sarah was fast asleep beside me. I stood in the dark, silent hallway, my heart pounding, and listened. There was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I tried to rationalize it. The house was old. Wind could do strange things when it passed over an old roof or through a keyhole. It was just the wind. Just the wind. The note in the junk drawer had seemed like a joke, a silly, theatrical warning. But as the days turned into weeks, and the autumn winds began to pick up, sweeping through the great trees of the park and rattling our window panes, I started to wonder. It was a foolish, creeping thought, one I tried to push away. But the thought persisted, echoing in the back of my mind, growing louder with every strange hum, every inexplicable whistle. What did they mean? Don't listen. How can you not listen to something that's all around you? The change was gradual. So gradual, in fact, that for a long time, I convinced myself it was all in my head. Or maybe it was Sarah. She was the first one to truly be affected by it. She'd always been a light sleeper, but now she was plagued by insomnia. She'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. When I'd ask what was wrong, she would just shake her head. It's the noise, she'd whisper. It keeps me up. What noise? I'd ask, straining my own ears in the darkness. The wind. No, not just the wind, she'd say, her voice strained. It's in the wind. A sound. Like voices, but far away. Like a radio tuned to a dead station, but you can still hear music underneath the static. I listened. All I could hear was the rustle of leaves, the gentle creak of the house. I told her it was probably the trees. The park was like a giant lung, and the wind moving through thousands of branches and leaves would create all sorts of illusions of sound. She didn't seem convinced. The humming became more frequent. It would settle over the house in the late afternoons, a low-frequency thrum that you felt more in your bones than you heard with your ears. It made your teeth ache. It made the hair on your arms stand up. I started noticing patterns. It was always strongest on windy days. The more the trees in the park swayed and danced, the louder the hum in our house became. One Saturday, I was up on a ladder, cleaning out the gutters. It was a blustery day, with gray clouds scudding across the sky. The wind was relentless, whipping my jacket and making the ladder feel unsteady. And through the rushing sound, I heard it clearly for the first time. It wasn't just a hum. It wasn't just a whistle. It was a melody. It was faint, discordant, and deeply unsettling. It was a series of notes that didn't seem to belong together, rising and falling in a way that defied any musical scale I knew. It was like a child's nursery rhyme played backwards, twisted and broken. It slithered through the roar of the wind, directly into my ear. I nearly fell off the ladder. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I scrambled down, my hands shaking. Sarah came out onto the porch. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face pale. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "That music?" She just looked at me, her eyes wide with a kind of weary validation. "You hear it too, then?" she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I hear it all the time now." That night, we talked. Really talked. We sat in the living room, the lights on, a fire crackling in the hearth as if to ward off the encroaching darkness. She told me the sounds were becoming clearer for her. She said they sometimes sounded like whispers, just on the edge of comprehension. Muffled words, spoken in a chorus of sibilant, breathy voices. They would rise and fall with the gusts of wind outside. We pulled the note out of the junk drawer. We stared at it, the 5 words seeming less like a quirky joke and more like a desperate plea. "Don't listen to the wind." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We soundproof," I said, my voice full of a confidence I didn't feel. "We'll get heavy curtains. We'll put seals on the doors and windows. It's an old house. It's just drafts and acoustics. We can fix this." The next week was a flurry of activity. We went to the hardware store and bought weather stripping, insulation foam, and thick, heavy blackout curtains for every window. We worked together, a team against the encroaching strangeness. For a few days, it seemed to work. The house felt quieter, more insulated. The hum was dampened, the whistles were gone. We slept through the night for the first time in weeks. We felt victorious. But we hadn't fixed anything. We had only plugged our ears. And the thing that was making the noise was patient. The first sign that our efforts were futile came from the fireplace. We were sitting on the couch, reading, enjoying the manufactured quiet. A strong gust of wind howled outside, and suddenly, a sharp, piercing whistle echoed from the chimney. It wasn't the sound of air being pulled up the flue. It was the same, deliberate, 2-note whistle I'd heard in the upstairs hall. It was inside. It had found another way in. Sarah flinched, dropping her book. I stared at the dark maw of the fireplace. The sound had been sharp, clear, and impossibly close. Then, something worse happened. We had an old, clawfoot bathtub in the upstairs bathroom. One of its faucets had a slow, persistent drip. Drip, drip, drip. It was a sound I'd been meaning to fix. One night, I was woken from a dead sleep by Sarah shaking me. "Listen," she whispered, her body rigid with fear. I sat up, my head foggy. The wind was moaning outside, and I could hear the drip from the bathroom. Drip, drip, drip. But it wasn't just the drip. Between each drop, a voice whispered a single, drawn-out word. "Drip. Come. Drip. Here. Drip. Now." It was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of autumn leaves skittering across pavement. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it, a trick of a sleep-addled mind. But I looked at Sarah, and I saw the terror in her eyes. She heard it too. We didn't sleep in our bed that night. We went downstairs and lay on the couch together, leaving the lights on, the television playing a mindless late-night infomercial, anything to drown out the sounds of the house. The house was no longer just making noise. It was trying to talk, and its vocabulary was growing. You can't live in a state of constant, high alert. It's impossible. Your mind and body won't allow it. And so, a new, terrible kind of normal began to set in. We learned to live with the whispers. We learned to ignore the discordant melodies that rode the currents of the wind. We became experts at pretending. We'd turn up the volume on the TV, play music while we cooked dinner, fill the house with our own noise to create a buffer against its noise. But the entity, the presence, whatever it was intelligent. It learned. It adapted. When it realized we were actively ignoring its generalized calls, it changed its tactics. It got personal. The whispers stopped being a vague, unintelligible chorus. They began to find focus. They started to pick at the seams of our lives, our relationship, our private fears. I was working on a big project at my job, a proposal that I was terrified of failing. I'd be in my home office, staring at my laptop, and a gust of wind would rattle the window. And in the rattle, I'd hear it. A sibilant whisper, right beside my ear. They know you're a fraud. You're going to fail. She'll be so disappointed in you. I would flinch, my blood running cold. I'd whip my head around to find an empty room. The words were tailored to my deepest insecurities. Things I'd never spoken aloud, not even to Sarah. How could it know? It did the same to her. Sarah has a complicated relationship with her sister. They had a falling out years ago, a bitter argument that left deep wounds on both sides. She'd be in the garden, pulling weeds, and the wind rustling the leaves of the park trees would carry the whispers to her. She never loved you. It was all your fault. You're better off alone. She would come inside, her face a mask of pain, and refuse to talk about it. The house was isolating us, turning us inward, forcing us to marinate in our own private anxieties. It was building walls between us, brick by whispering brick. The most insidious trick was the mimicry. It started with simple sounds. The creak of a specific floorboard outside our bedroom door, as if someone was standing there. The jingle of my keys on the hook by the door, even though they were sitting on the kitchen counter. Small, domestic sounds, designed to make you question your own senses. Then, it learned our voices. One afternoon, I was in the basement, trying to fix the leaking pipe on the washing machine. I had my tools spread out, my hands covered in grime. The basement was the one place in the house that felt somewhat insulated, with its thick stone walls. Suddenly, I heard Sarah call my name from the top of the stairs. Alex? Can you come up here for a second? It was her voice. Perfect. The exact intonation, the slight lilt she has when she's about to ask for a favor. Just a minute. I called back, wiping my hands on a rag. I finished tightening a joint and headed up the wooden stairs. I emerged into the kitchen. It was empty. Sarah? I called out. I walked through the ground floor. Living room, dining room, den. All empty. I went upstairs. The bedroom was empty. The bathroom was empty. I was starting to feel a cold dread creep up my spine. I pulled out my phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? She said. Her voice was tinny through the phone, and I could hear the sound of traffic in the background. Where are you? I asked, my own voice tight. I'm at the grocery store. I told you I was going this morning, remember? I just needed to get out of the house for a bit. Is everything okay? My blood turned to ice. Yeah, I managed to say. Yeah, everything's fine. See you when you get back. I hung up the phone and stood in the silent, empty house. It hadn't been Sarah. The house had worn her voice like a costume. It had called to me, tried to lure me. For what purpose, I couldn't begin to imagine. When I told Sarah what had happened, she wasn't surprised. She just nodded, a deep sadness in her eyes. It did the same to me yesterday, she confessed. I was on the porch, reading. And I heard you, clear as day, from the living room window. You said, "Don't you think it's beautiful?" I looked up, and there was no one there. I knew you were at work. The trust between us, the fundamental bedrock of our marriage, began to erode. Not because we didn't believe each other, but because we could no longer trust our own perceptions. Was that Sarah calling me from the other room? Or was it the house? Was that my own nagging self-doubt? Or was it a whisper on the wind? The line between reality and the entity's manipulations was blurring. We started arguing. Small, petty fights that would escalate into furious, hurtful shouting matches. The fights were always followed by a profound, humming silence in the house, as if it was feeding on the negative energy, the misery it had created. It was a parasite, and we were its hosts. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. A storm was rolling in, the sky a bruised purple. The wind was howling, a living thing, clawing at the house. We were having one of our fights. I don't even remember what it was about now. But the whispers were fanning the flames. I could hear them, a chorus of malice woven into the gale outside, telling me she was lying to me, that she didn't respect me. I'm sure she was hearing her own personalized venom. In a fit of rage and desperation, I yelled, I can't live like this anymore. And from the storm outside, a voice boomed, a composite of 1,000 whispering voices, all speaking as one. It was a sound so loud it shook the windows in their frames. Then leave. Sarah and I froze, staring at each other, the anger draining away, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. The house had spoken. It had joined our conversation. And it had given me an order. We were no longer just being haunted. We were being evicted. The single, booming command from the storm changed everything. The pretense was over. We weren't living in a quirky old house with an acoustic anomaly. We were living inside something malevolent. And it wanted us gone. The next morning, the air was still and heavy, as if the house was holding its breath. Sarah and I moved around each other in a daze, speaking in hushed tones. The fight was forgotten, replaced by a shared, primal fear. The Hendersons, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. They got out. How? It was the question that had been hovering in the back of my mind. The rushed closing, their anxious eyes. They hadn't been sad to leave their home. They had been terrified to stay another minute. The note wasn't a joke. It was the only thing they dared to leave behind. It was their protocol. I'm going to find out, I said, a new resolve hardening my fear into action. I'm going to find out everything I can about this house, about the people who lived here before us. While Sarah packed a small overnight bag for us to stay at a motel, the thought of spending another night in that house was unbearable. I drove to the county records office in the next town over. It was a dusty, quiet place filled with the smell of old paper and decaying glue. I spent hours poring over property deeds, census records, and old town maps. The house was built in 1888 by a man named Josiah Thorne. He was a wealthy merchant who had lost his wife and child to influenza. He built the house to overlook the park, a memorial to them. He lived there alone for 20 years and died in the house. The cause of death was listed as self-inflicted wound. After Thorne, the house had a strange and unsettling history of ownership. No one ever stayed for more than a few years. A family in the 1920s, the McCrady's, left abruptly in the middle of the night, abandoning most of their possessions. The deed was transferred to the bank. In the 1940s, a returned soldier and his wife bought it. He was institutionalized for wartime hysteria and auditory hallucinations 2 years later. His wife sold the house and moved away. Then came the Holloway family in the 1960s. This was the story that made my blood run cold. I found the old microfiche newspaper articles. The Holloways had 2 young children, a boy and a girl. One autumn evening, the 7-year-old daughter, Emily, vanished. A massive search was conducted. The entire town, the police, everyone searched the park, the woods, the lake. They found nothing. No trace of her. The articles described her parents as being distraught, then slowly becoming unhinged. Mrs. Holloway told the police that Emily hadn't been taken, but that she had listened to the wind song and had gone to play in the trees. Mr. Holloway, a year after the disappearance, walked into the park and was never seen again. His car was found parked by the entrance. The pattern was undeniable. Loneliness, grief, whispers, madness, disappearance, death. The house, or more accurately, the entity that the house was a conduit for, didn't just haunt. It consumed. It fed on sorrow and weakness, and it whispered people away. I drove back from the records office in a cold sweat, the steering wheel slippery in my hands. The entity wasn't just in the house. The house was an amplifier, but the source was the park, the ancient trees, the open space. It was a wilderness, and we had unknowingly stumbled into its territory. Josiah Thorne, in his grief, must have been the first one to truly listen, to give it a foothold, to anchor it to the property. I called the real estate agent who had sold us the house. I played it cool, said I was just curious about the previous owners, the Hendersons. After some prodding, she reluctantly gave me a forwarding address for them in a retirement community 3 states away. That night, in the sterile quiet of the motel room, I wrote them a letter. I didn't mention the whispers or the voices. I kept it vague. I just said we were finding the house had some unique acoustical properties, and that we had found their note. I ended the letter with a simple, desperate question. What is the protocol? We waited. For 2 weeks, we lived out of the motel. We drive by the house during the day. It looked so normal, so peaceful, basking in the autumn sun. But we knew. We knew what was coiled inside it, waiting patiently. Then, a letter arrived at the motel for me. It was a plain white envelope with the return address of the retirement community. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same thick, soft cardstock as the original note. The handwriting was shaky, but firm. It was from Mr. Henderson. It read, Alex, I am sorry. I hoped you would never need this. My wife, Eleanor, she started to listen. It started telling her things. About her mother who passed. Sweet things. It offered her comfort. The note is not a metaphor. It is a literal instruction. It is the only defense. You cannot reason with it. You cannot fight it. You cannot block it out. Those things give it power. They are forms of listening. To fight something, you must first acknowledge it. You must listen to it to know its position. The only protocol is to not listen. This does not mean failing to hear. That is impossible. It means you must make the sounds meaningless. Treat them as you would the sound of rain, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of leaves. Give them no significance. Grant them no intelligence. Do not let them into your thoughts. Do not engage. Do not fear them. Do not hate them. Simply let them be noise. It preys on emotion. It feeds on the attention you give it. Starve it. It will promise you anything. It will use the voices of your loved ones. It will know your deepest secrets. You must believe in the person standing next to you more than you believe what your own ears tell you. We got out because I dragged Eleanor from the house while she was screaming that her mother was calling for her from the park. We left everything behind. You must do the same. Starve it. And run. I read the letter aloud to Sarah. The motel room was silent. The instructions were terrifying in their simplicity. It wasn't a ghost we could exorcise or a monster we could fight. It was a psychic parasite, and its main weapon was our own minds. So we go back, Sarah asked, her voice small. We go back, I said, my voice grim. But we go back to leave. We pack what matters. And we do not, under any circumstances, listen. We had a plan. We had the protocol. We thought we were ready. We were wrong. Armed with Henderson's letter, we returned to the house. The air was different now. Before, the strangeness had been a creeping dread. Now, it was a known enemy. The moment I turned the key in the lock, I felt it. A palpable sense of awareness. The house, the entity, knew we were back. And it knew that we knew. The humming started immediately. Low and guttural, it vibrated up through the soles of my feet. Noise, I said aloud, looking at Sarah. Just the wind in an old house. Just noise, she repeated, her voice a little shaky. We were trying to convince ourselves. We had a system. We would pack one room at a time, together. Never be alone. We would talk constantly, about anything and everything, our first date, plans for the future, a funny movie, we saw, anything to fill the air with our sounds, leaving no room for its sounds. For the first hour, it worked. We moved through the kitchen, packing essentials, pots, pans, the good knives. The house was filled with the clatter of our packing and the sound of our voices. The whispers started, weaving around our conversation, but we ignored them. We followed the protocol. We treated them like the sound of passing traffic. Then, it realized its old tricks weren't working. It escalated. We were in the living room, taking down pictures from the walls. I was carefully wrapping a framed photo of our wedding day. A sudden gust of wind hit the side of the house, and with it came a sound that made me freeze. It was the sound of a baby crying. A soft, desperate wail. It seemed to be coming from the upstairs bedroom, the one we had imagined would one day be a nursery. Sarah stopped, her back rigid. Her hands flew to her mouth. We had been trying to have a child for over a year with no success. It was a deep, private source of pain for both of us. A vulnerability. And the house knew it. It's not real, Sarah, I said, my voice strained. It's the wind in the eaves. It's just noise. It sounds so real, she wept, tears streaming down her face. The crying continued, a heartbreaking, pitiful sound designed to shred our nerves and exploit our deepest desires. Look at me, I said, crossing the room and taking her by the shoulders. Look at me. It's a trick. It's a parasite trying to get a reaction. We starve it. Remember? We give it nothing. She nodded, wiping her tears, but the resolve in her eyes was wavering. The sound was a poison dart, and it had hit its mark. We moved on to our bedroom. The crying sound faded, replaced by the low hum again. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the tension thick between us. As I was emptying my bedside table drawer, my fingers brushed against a small, velvet box. Inside was the engagement ring my grandfather had given my grandmother. He had passed away 2 years ago. I adored him. As I held the box, a voice spoke from right behind me. That was a good choice, son. She's a keeper. It was my grandfather's voice. Not a mimicry. Not a close approximation. It was his voice. The same warm, gravelly timbre, the same gentle chuckle in his tone. A voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, a voice I missed with an ache that was still raw. I dropped the box. My breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct, every fiber of my being, screamed at me to turn around, to see him, to answer him. It was a pull so powerful it was physical. Alex, Sarah said, her voice sharp with alarm. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's not real. It's a recording. It's a trick. It's noise. I repeated Henderson's protocol in my mind like a mantra. Do not engage. Do not acknowledge. Starve it. It's nothing, I said, my voice choked. I didn't turn around. I forced myself to bend down, pick up the ring box, and put it in my pocket. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. To ignore the voice of a man I loved. The entity was furious at my denial. The temperature in the room plummeted. A cold so intense it felt like it was leaching the heat from my bones. The windows began to frost over from the inside. The gentle hum of the house escalated into a deep, guttural growl, like a great beast waking from its slumber. But we kept packing. We moved like automatons, fueled by adrenaline and terror. We packed clothes, documents, sentimental items. We were abandoning the rest. The furniture, the books, the life we had tried to build here. It was all tainted now. The final straw came when we were in the spare room. The room that overlooked the park most directly. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows from the trees. As Sarah was closing a suitcase, a new voice entered the fray. It was a little girl's voice. Faint, sad, and very, very close. Mommy? I'm cold. Sarah froze. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The Holloways, she whispered. Emily. The little girl's voice came again, a desperate, pleading whisper that seemed to ride the wind straight from the dark trees of the park and through the glass of the window. Can you see me? I'm by the big oak tree. Please let me in. We both turned to look out the window, and my heart stopped. By the largest oak tree at the edge of the park, the one closest to our yard, a small swing we'd never seen before was moving. It swayed back and forth in the windless, twilight air, as if an invisible child was sitting on it. And for a split second, I saw her. A flicker. A pale, shimmering outline of a little girl in a simple dress, her feet kicking in the air as she swung. That's when we broke. The protocol was to starve it, to ignore it. But how do you ignore a child, lost and cold? How do you turn your back on that? Even if you know, logically, that it's a trap, a lure, a performance put on by a monstrous, ancient thing your humanity screams at you to act. We have to go, I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. Now. Leave it. Leave everything. The little girl's voice began to cry, the sound full of a terrible, lonely despair. Don't leave me here, it's so dark. Sarah let out a sob. The entity had found its trump card. It wasn't our fears or our grief that would break us. It was our compassion. We ran. We didn't walk. We ran down the stairs, fumbling with the suitcases. The house was in an uproar now. The whispers were a cacophony, a legion of voices, our parents, our friends, strangers, all speaking at once. The baby was crying. My grandfather was calling my name. Emily was begging us not to leave her alone in the dark. The very air was thick with sound, a psychic storm designed to paralyze us. We burst out the front door, into the cold night air, and didn't look back. We threw the suitcases in the car and squealed out of the driveway. As I drove, my eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but in the rearview mirror, I could see the house. The lights in the upstairs windows were flickering on and off, on and off. And the porch swing, the one we had so happily repaired, was swaying violently in the still night air, as if in a furious, silent rage. We drove for an hour, not speaking, before I pulled into a brightly lit, 24-hour diner. The sudden immersion in normalcy was jarring. The smell of coffee and bacon, the clatter of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation. It felt like surfacing after being held underwater for too long. We sat in a booth, shivering, despite the warmth of the diner. We had escaped, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a retreat, a rout. It almost got us, Sarah said, her voice hoarse. With the little girl. I almost went to the window. I know, I said, reaching across the table to hold her trembling hands. That's how it wins. It doesn't break down the door. It makes you open it. We ordered coffee we didn't drink and food we didn't eat. We just sat there, trying to process the sheer, calculated malevolence of what we had just experienced. It hadn't just used voices. It had used memories, emotions, a specific family tragedy from 50 years ago, and our own deepest vulnerabilities. It was a predator of the highest order. We spent the night at another anonymous motel. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers, saw the swinging empty swing. The sounds were burned into my memory. The entity may have been tied to the house and the park, but it had planted a part of itself in us. The next day, we had to make a decision. We couldn't just walk away. The house was in our name. We had a mortgage. We couldn't, in good conscience, sell it to another unsuspecting family, passing on the curse. We couldn't leave another note and run like the Hendersons. Not after what we now knew. Not after hearing Emily Holloway's stolen voice. We have to go back, I said, dreading the words even as I spoke them. One last time. Not to get anything, but to do something. Do what, Alex? Sarah asked, her face pale. Henderson said you can't fight it. He said you can't fight it, you can't reason with it, and you can't block it out. Because all of that is a form of listening, I reasoned, thinking back to his letter. He said we have to starve it. We started by ignoring it and running away. But what if there's another way to starve it? What if we take away its amplifier? My plan was desperate, probably foolish, and born from a place of rage rather than logic. The house was its sounding board, its concert hall. It used the chimneys, the pipes, the old walls, the very air within it to focus its power, to turn the whispers of the park into coherent, weaponized sound. What if we filled the house with something else? Something that couldn't be corrupted? Silence. Pure, manufactured, industrial-grade silence. We spent a small fortune at a construction supply store. We bought dozens of cans of expanding insulation foam, the kind used to seal gaps and deaden sound. We bought heavy-duty ear protection, the kind used by workers on airport tarmacs. We weren't trying to block out the sound for our own sake. We were going to mummify the house from the inside out. We were going to choke it. We drove back to the house in the middle of the day. The sun was bright. The sky was clear. The park looked beautiful and serene. It was a perfect mask. We put on the ear protection before we even got out of the car. The world went blessedly, unnervingly quiet. We could feel the low vibration of the car's engine through the seats, but we couldn't hear it. It was a strange, disorienting sensation. We walked up to the house. As soon as we stepped onto the porch, I could feel it. The hum. It wasn't a sound anymore, not with the protectors on, but a vibration. A pressure in my sinuses, a thrumming in my chest. It was angry. We went inside. The house was cold, and the air was thick with a palpable animosity. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We had our plan. We started with the fireplace. I took a can of the foam, attached the nozzle, and aimed it deep into the chimney flue. I pressed the trigger. The foam hissed out, expanding rapidly, a thick, sticky white mass that filled the dark opening. I kept spraying until the entire fireplace was a sealed tomb of hardening foam. As I worked, I could feel the vibrations in the house intensify. The floorboards beneath my feet began to tremble. A low, subsonic pulse throbbed through the walls, a silent, furious tantrum. Sarah started on the windows. She went from room to room, sealing every crack, every seam, every gap between the sashes and the frames with the insulating foam. Then she moved on to the plumbing, sealing the openings where pipes entered the rooms from the walls. The house fought back. Objects began to fall off shelves. A book flew across the living room and hit the wall. A vase shattered on the floor. In the kitchen, the cabinet doors began to swing open and slam shut with violent force. We couldn't hear the sounds, but we saw the motion, the chaotic, poltergeist-like fury. We ignored it. We kept working, our movements methodical, our faces grim. We were entomologists, pinning a specimen. We were surgeons, cutting out a cancer. I went upstairs, to the hallway where I had first heard the piercing whistle. I found the source, a small, ornate ventilation grate high on the wall. I filled it with foam until it oozed from the metalwork. The pressure in the air was becoming immense. It felt like the moments before a lightning strike. My head was pounding, and I felt a wave of dizziness. Through my ear protectors, I could feel a vibration so intense it was almost a physical blow. The entity was focusing all its energy, all its rage, on us. I stumbled into the spare bedroom, the one overlooking the park. The room where we had heard Emily's voice. Sarah was there, just finishing the window. As she pulled the can away, we both looked out at the park. The swing was moving again, violently. It was arcing high into the air, as if pushed by an unseen, powerful giant. The trees themselves seemed to be shaking, their branches thrashing, even though the air outside was perfectly still. The park was having a seizure. And then the whispers started. They bypassed the ear protection. They weren't sound waves traveling through the air. They were being broadcast directly into our minds. Get out. You cannot silence me. I am the breath in the lungs of this place. I will tear your minds apart. It was a raw, unfiltered stream of consciousness, full of an ancient, cosmic rage. It was the voice of pure loneliness and hatred. It showed us images. The face of Josiah Thorne, his eyes wide with madness. The terrified face of Mrs. Holloway as she watched her daughter walk into the trees. The Hendersons, fleeing in their car. It showed us ourselves, growing old and insane in these rooms, our minds eroded to nothing. It was a direct psychic assault. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The pain was excruciating. I looked at Sarah. She was on the floor too, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands pressed against the sides of her head, over the ear protectors. This was its last-ditch effort. It couldn't use subtlety or tricks anymore, so it was using brute force. It was trying to break us. Through the pain, Henderson's words came back to me. You must believe in the person standing next to you more than you believe what your own ears tell you. Or in this case, what was being screamed inside my own skull. I crawled across the floor to Sarah. I grabbed her hand. It was ice cold. I squeezed it as hard as I could. She squeezed back. We looked at each other, our eyes full of terror, but also a sliver of defiance. We were not going to let it win. We were not going to let it tear us apart. We held on, anchoring each other against the psychic storm. We had sealed its entrances. We had taken away its voice. All it had left was this final, desperate scream, and we just had to ride it out. I don't know how long we knelt there, on the floor of that cold, vibrating room, holding hands like two terrified children in the dark. It felt like an eternity. But slowly, gradually, like a great engine running out of fuel, the pressure began to subside. The mental screaming faded from a roar to a shout, to a whisper, and then to a faint, sullen echo. And then, silence. Not the dead, artificial silence of our ear protectors. A real, profound silence. The vibrations in the floor stopped. The pressure in my head eased. The house was still. We had done it. We had won. We had suffocated the monster. We got to our feet, shaky and drained. We looked around the house. The foam was hardening in every opening, like scars. The place was a mess, a battlefield. But it was quiet. For the first time since we had moved in, it was truly, completely quiet. We took off the ear protectors. The silence was beautiful. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We walked out of the house, not running this time. We closed the door behind us, locked it, and walked to the car. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We knew what we were leaving behind. Not a home, but a tomb. A tomb for a voice on the wind. We never went back. We hired a lawyer to handle the situation. We declared bankruptcy. We lost the house, our down payment, everything. The bank took possession of a property that was, for all intents and purposes, hermetically sealed from the inside. I often wonder what they found. What the foreclosure team thought when they broke down the door and saw every vent, every crack, every opening choked with hardened foam. I'm sure they thought we were insane. In a way, they were right. You'd have to be insane to do what we did, or you'd have to have heard what we heard. We moved 1,000 miles away to a city in the desert. There are no great, ancient trees here. The wind is different. It's hot and dry, and it carries the scent of sand and asphalt, not damp earth and decaying leaves. It doesn't whisper. It just scours. I'll take that any day. We are still recovering. The scars are not visible, but they're there. Sarah still has nightmares sometimes. I'll wake up to find her sitting by the window, listening. I'll ask her what she hears, and she'll just shake her head and say, nothing. It's wonderful. Sometimes, on a quiet night, I think I can feel it. A faint echo of that humming in my bones. A phantom limb. A memory that has its own life. It's a reminder that we didn't kill it. You can't kill something that is woven into a place, something that might be as old as the land itself. We just took away its ability to speak through that particular house. We silenced one of its mouths. But the entity, the loneliness in the wilderness, is still there. It's in that park. It's waiting. Patient. It has all the time in the world. It's waiting for a new ear to turn its way. For someone else to build a house, to suffer a loss, to feel a moment of weakness. It's waiting for someone else to listen. The experience changed us. It taught us something fundamental about the world. We live on a thin, fragile crust of noise and light and logic. And just beneath it, there is a deep, dark, silent world. And sometimes, the wind can carry whispers up from that world. That's why I'm telling this story. It's not for sympathy. It's not for attention. It's a continuation of the protocol. The Hendersons passed it to me, and now I'm passing it on. It's a warning flare, shot up into the digital darkness. There are places in this world that are listening. They are hungry for our stories, our fears, our voices. They want to wear our lives like a mask. So if you ever find a dream home that seems too good to be true, if the previous owners seem a little too eager to leave, if you ever find a cryptic note that gives you a strange and simple rule, you should follow it. Trust the warnings. Trust the people who came before. Trust the protocol. And whatever you do, no matter how sweet the song, no matter whose voice it uses, don't listen to the wind. Thank you for joining me for this account. The world is full of strange and unexplained phenomena, and sometimes the only thing that separates a chilling story from a personal tragedy is a single piece of advice, a protocol passed down. If you have your own stories, your own protocols for dealing with the unknown, feel free to share them in the comments below. And if you want to explore more of these wildernesses with us, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the Wilderness Protocol. Stay safe, stay aware, and thank you for listening.